Welcome to Explanation Buddy. Get ready to dive into a mind-bending thriller that'll have you questioning reality. Today, let's do the recap of Severance, the hit Apple TV Plus series that's redefining the workplace drama. From heart-pounding moments to shocking revelations, Severance is a roller coaster of emotions that you won't want to miss. Get ready to relive every twist and turn in our recap of this gripping series. Buckle up, it's going to be a wild ride. A woman wakes up on a table in a locked room, disoriented and desperate to escape, as a disembodied voice echoes, asking her to answer a brief survey. Despite her frantic attempts to flee, the voice persists, and eventually she relents. As she answers basic questions about her identity, she realizes with horror that she doesn't remember anything about herself. The source of the voice steps into the room and tells her she got a perfect score. Earlier that morning, we meet Mark Scout, the man behind the voice, sobbing in his car before work. Mark is an employee at Lumon Corporation. As he clocks in, greets the security guard, and descends to the severed floor, his sadness vanishes, replaced by a calm demeanor. His day at the office has barely begun when his boss, Miss Coble, calls him in. She drops a bombshell. His supervisor, Petey, has stepped down, and Mark is promoted to take his place. His first task is to oversee the initiation of his replacement, Irving, with the same survey seen at the beginning, now from Mark's perspective. After the survey, Helly, the new recruit, demands to leave. Surprisingly, Mark agrees and points her to the door, but instead of stepping outside, she ends up right back in the office. She asks if she's in hell, which Mark denies. In Miss Coble's office, Helly watches a video made by herself stating she voluntarily underwent the severance process. Severed employees have their memories split, remembering nothing of their work life while outside and vice versa. This makes them two identities sharing one body, with no way to reverse the change. Mark tries to comfort a devastated Helly, telling her, "Every time you find yourself here, it's because you chose to come back." Later, Mark attends a dinner party with his pregnant sister and brother-in-law. Things get awkward when his severance is brought up. That night, he spots a disheveled man staring at him through a window. While getting dinner alone, Mark has a frustrating chat about recycling with his elderly neighbor, Miss Selvig. Suddenly, the mysterious man from the previous night, Petey, sits at his table and tells him to hang up. Petey reveals he's Mark's best friend from work and has somehow reversed his severance. Now on the run from Lumon, Petey gives Mark an address, tells him to trust no one, and leaves. Mark arrives home greeted by Miss Selvig, who we shockingly learn is Miss Coble herself. And that's just the beginning. The episode opens with a flashback to an unsevered Helly recording the video we saw in the last episode, with Mr. Milchick filming. Helly, visibly anxious, reads from a script outlining her consent to undergo the severance procedure. Milchick, cheerful and professional, encourages her as she finishes. Once the recording wraps up, Milchick leads Helly to an operating room. The atmosphere shifts dramatically as we see her prepped for surgery. The camera focuses on the intense and invasive procedure, her head being cut open and her skull being drilled into. This visceral moment underscores the gravity of the severance process. The scene concludes with Milchick's chillingly upbeat comment, "I'm very excited to meet her," foreshadowing the dual existence Helly is about to experience. We then revisit the stairwell exit scene from the last episode, but this time through Outie Helly's eyes. Outie Helly is thrust into the stairwell, disoriented and confused, only to encounter Mr. Milchick waiting for her. He explains that her innie, the work persona, is struggling to adjust, and that she needs to re-enter the office multiple times until the transition sticks. Outie Helly reluctantly complies, each attempt becoming more frustrating and surreal. This repetitive cycle highlights the disorienting nature of the severance process. The scene jumps forward to the end of the day, where Outie Helly, exhausted and bewildered, receives a bouquet of flowers from Milchick as a congratulatory gesture. This strange token of appreciation underscores the bizarre and unsettling culture within Lumon Industries. The narrative shifts to the following Monday. Mark arrives at the office early, stepping into his new role as supervisor. His morning routine is methodical but tinged with melancholy. As he organizes his desk, he pauses, picking up photos of Petey, his former supervisor and friend. Mark's emotional struggle is evident as he hides the photos in a storage closet, unable to face the reminders of his friend's sudden departure. This moment of vulnerability offers a glimpse into Mark's inner turmoil and the cost of the severance process on personal relationships. Later that day, Mark and his colleague Dylan help train Helly on the basics of data refining. Mark explains the seemingly nonsensical task of identifying numbers that evoke specific emotions and sorting them accordingly. Helly is baffled and frustrated by the absurdity of the job. The scene illustrates the dehumanizing and bewildering nature of the work at Lumon, where employees are reduced to performing tasks with little to no understanding of their purpose. A welcome celebration for Helly begins, offering a rare moment of camaraderie amidst the sterile environment. During the festivities, Mark confesses that he hid Petey's photographs because he's deeply affected by his departure. This admission highlights the bond between the employees, even as their memories and identities are forcibly compartmentalized. Helly, seeking a way to communicate with her outie, asks if she can write a note to herself. She's informed that the elevators are equipped with code detectors, which prevents such communication. Skeptical, Helly writes, "I quit" on a post-it and makes a dash for the elevator. The detectors activate, proving their existence, and Helly is restrained. Mark takes full responsibility for her actions and is escorted to a place ominously named the break room, hinting at severe consequences. Later that night, we see outie Mark on a first date since his wife's death. Initially, the date goes well, but it takes a turn for the worse when Mark defends his job at Lumon and clashes with an anti-severance activist from the Whole Mind Collective. After returning home, Mark finds Miss Selvig, his neighbor, in his house with cookies. The brief conversation with her feels unsettling, especially given her dual identity as Miss Coble, Mark's boss. The scene underscores the invasive and omnipresent nature of Lumon in Mark's life, blurring the lines between his personal and professional worlds. Mark's isolation and the pervasive control of Lumon become increasingly apparent as he goes to bed. The next day, Mark calls in sick, unable to face another day at Lumon. Back at the office, Helly is visibly worried about Mark's absence, fearing he was fired because of her elevator stunt. Meanwhile, Milchick, Grainer, and Coble discuss Mark's unexpected absence in private, hinting at underlying concerns and surveillance measures. This internal discussion reveals the meticulous control Lumon exerts over its employees and the potential consequences of deviating from protocol. Outside of Lumon, Mark ventures to the address Petey provided, leading him to an abandoned greenhouse. Inside, he finds Petey, who is hiding from Lumon's relentless pursuit. Petey explains his dire situation to Mark, revealing that he's managed to combine both sides of his personality, an unprecedented and dangerous feat. The conflicting memories are driving Petey towards insanity. He shows Mark a crude map of the severed floor and plays a smuggled tape recording of Mark being tortured in the break room. This harrowing revelation shocks Mark, illustrating the extreme measures Lumon employs to maintain control. The scene deepens the mystery and heightens the stakes, as Mark grapples with the disturbing truth about his workplace. Back at Lumon, Irving struggles with exhaustion and experiences a bizarre hallucination of the room filling with black goo. Milchick intervenes, taking Irving for a wellness session with Miss Casey, the on-site therapist. While waiting, Irving strikes up a conversation with Bert, the charming head of the optics and design department. This interaction provides a rare glimpse of camaraderie and curiosity within Lumon's rigid structure. The wellness session itself is unsettling, as Miss Casey reads Irving a series of facts about his outie, designed to reinforce a sense of identity and compliance. The session blurs the line between therapy and indoctrination, reflecting Lumon's invasive control over its employees' minds. Irving shares his meeting with Bert with Dylan, who reacts with hostility, expressing a deep-seated tribal animosity towards the optics and design department. He recounts a rumor that O&D workers once slaughtered all the macrodata refinement workers, a story that adds to the tension and paranoia within Lumon. Amidst their argument, Helly completes her first data refinement task, marking a small victory in her confusing and oppressive new reality. Meanwhile, Mark offers Petey refuge in his basement, creating a precarious alliance. As Petey uses Mark's shower, he is overwhelmed by a flashback to his time at Lumon and collapses. This final scene underscores the fragile and dangerous nature of Petey's condition, leaving viewers on edge as they anticipate the unfolding consequences of his actions and Mark's growing entanglement in the mystery of Lumon. We pick up right where the last episode left off. Mark asks if Petey is okay, and Petey insists he's fine, though he's clearly still on edge. Petey worries about the security of Mark's house. Mark reassures him that it's safe, unaware that Mrs. Selvig, aka Miss Coble, is watching from across the street. Petey then experiences another hallucination, believing he's back at Lumon, and begins to panic. That night, Mark tries to drown his troubles in alcohol, falling asleep in front of a cable news debate about the legality of severance. The next morning, Mark wakes Petey, who warns him that using severance as a coping mechanism for his wife's death isn't healthy. As Mark leaves for work, he encounters Mrs. Selvig, who offers to bring him more cookies. Mark agrees, trying to be polite. At Lumon, Mark is updating the group photos when Helly approaches him, saying not to bother since she's submitted her resignation request. She's confident her outie will accept. However, Milchick arrives to read some announcements, ending with the news that Helly's resignation has been denied. Helly makes another desperate escape attempt by writing "Let me out" across her arms, but Mark informs her that this won't work either. Meanwhile, Mark's brother-in-law Rickon drops off a copy of his new self-help book, The UUR, on Mark's doorstep. Selvig intercepts the package. In Mark's basement, Petey's condition continues to deteriorate. Selvig takes the book to Milchik, instructing him to check it for hidden messages. As Helly's escape attempts escalate, Irving decides she needs to be indoctrinated into Lumon's values and takes her to the Perpetuity Wing, a museum dedicated to the Egan family, especially Lumon's founder, Keir Egan. Dylan and Mark lighten the mood by playing a game of Egan Bingo to pass the time. Miss Coble has a tense meeting with the board, reassuring them that Severance is irreversible and her team is actively searching for Petey. On the way to the Perpetuity Wing, Irving encounters Bert again and tries to be friendly, but Dylan interrupts. At the museum, Irving catches Mark and Dylan playing bingo. While he scolds them, Helly seizes the opportunity to slip away and runs through the hallways, searching for an exit. Milchik is alerted and abandons checking Rickon's book to pursue Helly. She breaks a window to the stairwell and tries to drop a note reading "Never come back here" for her Audi to find. Grainer intercepts her and drags her to the break room. In the break room, Helly is forced to repeatedly recite a bizarre statement of apology. Mark finishes switching out the group photos and discovers that Petey has drawn a map of the severed floor on the back of one. Meanwhile, Petey has left Mark's house and is wandering the streets. He stumbles into a convenience store before collapsing. Mark notices Petey's absence and drives around searching for him, arriving at the convenience store just in time to see Petey collapse, presumably dead. Shaken, Mark returns home and hurriedly destroys all evidence of Petey's presence in his basement. As he finishes, Petey's cell phone starts buzzing. Helly begins the episode in the break room, still reading the compunction statement from last episode. She's visibly tired and upset. Milchik finally lets her go when her workday ends, telling her they'll pick it up tomorrow. Helly gets on the elevator to leave and realizes that tomorrow has already started, and Milchik is waiting for her. She has read this statement 259 times, and it's starting to get to her. She hears what sounds like an old man speaking from somewhere in the room. Back at Mark's house, Petey's phone rings incessantly. Mark stashes it under a sleeping bag. At Lumon, Mark is looking over Petey's map. Bert drops by the office to deliver some tote bags for the macrodata refinement, but Dylan drives him away. Bert offers to give MDR a tour of O&D, an offer that only Irving accepts. Helly returns from the break room, emotionally wrecked. She's read the statement 1,072 times. Over at the O&D department, Bert and Irving bond over Keir Egan's words and briefly hold hands before Irving breaks away. At MDR, Dylan and Helly discover Petey's map and start arguing over what to do about it. Hoping to prevent any conflict, Mark drops the map in the office shredder. Irving heads back to MDR but spots the abandoned copy of the UUR in the conference room. He brings it to Mark, worried about the ban on outside reading material. Mark opens the book and sees that it's addressed to him, or rather his Audi. Helly grabs a paper cutter and barges into Coble's office, demanding a camera. Coble will let her record a message to her Audi or she'll cut her fingers off. Coble acquiesces. At the end of the day, Helly walks confidently to the elevator with the video in hand, telling Milchik she was never sorry before leaving. Right after leaving, Helly finds herself back in the elevator with a new disc in hand. The new video is from Audi Helly, who tells her any counterpart that she's not a person and should abandon any hope of leaving. The resignation request is denied. Mark and Selvig, aka Coble, both attend Petey's funeral for different secret reasons. Coble to ensure that no evidence of Petey's reintegration gets out, Mark to pay respects to a friend he shouldn't be aware of. They both make excuses to each other, justifying their presence. Coble ducks away while a video is being played to remove Petey's severance chip with a drill. Mark meets Petey's daughter, June. Mark quickly becomes overwhelmed by the funeral and leaves with Selvig in tow. At home, he explains that he's still grieving the loss of his wife. He drives to the tree where she died and appears to remember her, smiling through tears. Back at Lumon, Mark secretly pores over the UUR. Coble tells Milchik to call Mark in for a wellness check. Bert and Irving bond further and share a long handshake. Mark goes in for a wellness check at Coble's request. Dylan finds Mark's book. Helly strides through the hallway, grabbing a metal waste bin. Miss Casey tells Mark to sculpt a ball of clay. Helly grabs an extension cord. Intensely focused, Mark sculpts the ball of clay into a tree as Coble watches on a security camera. Helly taps her ID card and opens the elevator. Dylan reads a poem from the UUR. Irving, shocked by the discovery of a vast manufacturing floor with at least 9 people in O&D, including Bert and Felicia, retreats in confusion and disillusionment back to MDR. Helly stands on the metal bin, affixing the extension cord to the top of the elevator. Helly kicks the bin out from under her, hanging herself in the elevator. Outie Helly wakes up to find she's been hanged and desperately tries to save herself. As Mark clocks out, he becomes the first to discover Helly's hanging body and immediately tries to help her. Grainer arrives, gets Helly's body down, and forces Mark into the elevator. Mark can only helplessly ask if she's okay before he loses consciousness and reverts to his outie self. The next morning, Mark enters the severed floor and begins to panic again. When the doors open, Helly is already gone, moved while Mark was away. Coble tells Mark that Helly is hospitalized with no permanent damage and will be back in a few days. Grainer meets Coble to inform her that he tested Petey's chip, proving that Petey had somehow reintegrated his memories. He thinks this calls for celebration, but is disappointed to realize that Coble hasn't told the board about Petey. Coble claims she wants to disclose all the information at once. Meanwhile, Mark secretly continues reading Rickon's book. Later, Dylan and Irving argue over the painting's significance. Dylan takes it as ironclad proof that the coup is real and O&D can't be trusted, but Irving still doesn't believe it. Milchick goes back to Coble. "You ran a 266 on Irving B?" she asks. "I thought it would dissuade him from spending so much time with Bert G," Milchick says. Coble commends him on his initiative. Milchick then asks why Coble assigned Miss Casey to look after Helly, to which Coble responds she's trying something new with her. Mark contrives a way to get Helly out of the office so he can speak freely with her and asks her to help him map the severed floor. Helly says that she's not Mark's new Petey, and her only goal is for her outie to die knowing it was Helly who did it. Their conversation is suddenly interrupted by a shrill noise, like some kind of animal crying. Back at the MDR room, Casey tells Irving that Bert is in the conference room. Irving sets off to meet him. When he gets there, they talk for a bit before Dylan shows up and traps Bert by tying his belt around the conference room doors. When Dylan detects flirting between Irving and Bert, he pulls Irving aside to chastise him for getting close with a rival department. Helly and Mark follow the crying sound. It's a bleeding baby goat of all things. They follow it into a small room filled with baby goats and one harried man bottle feeding them. He yells at Helly and Mark to leave, insisting they're not ready. Dylan, Irving, and Bert go back to O&D. Bert claims the painting that MDR found does not exist. In fact, Bert shows a painting in the possession of O&D that shows the exact opposite situation, all the O&D members being killed by MDR workers. Dylan wonders why there would be two versions of the same painting. Walking back to MDR, Helly and Mark debate what the goats meant. Helly agrees to work on Mark's map. Bert brings Dylan and Irving to the mysterious back room of O&D, introducing the MDR members as friends. We open in Coble's basement. She puts a necklace with a Severance chip on it around her neck, then receives a call from Grainer. They've run the data from Petey's chip, he says, and he thinks the hack was performed by Ragabi. Coble hangs up and kneels next to a candlelit shrine filled with Keir Egan photos and artifacts. "Tame in me the tempers 4, that I may serve thee evermore. Place in me the values 9, that I may feel thy touch divine," she prays. The camera focuses on a photo of a young girl, presumably Coble, at some place called the Myrtle Egan School for Girls. Mark heads into his basement and takes Petey's phone from a box. He stares at it for a minute, then goes outside and throws it in the trash. At Lumon, Bert introduces Irving to a secret room he found filled with plants. The two come close to sharing a kiss, but Irving says he isn't ready. They share a tender moment nonetheless. Devon goes for a walk in the park with her newborn and unexpectedly runs into the woman from the birthing retreat, but she doesn't seem to remember Devon, and she didn't name her son William, but Bradley. She's the wife of a wealthy senator, Angelo Artetto. Angelo seems uncomfortable when Devon mentions the birthing retreat and quickly excuses himself and his wife, leaving Devon confused. Back at Lumon, Irving urges the MDR department to form an alliance with O&D so that they can better understand what's happening with Lumon. Helly is on board, but Dylan and Mark aren't so sure. Mark and Helly share a flirty moment, which Dylan takes notice of. The crew notices that Miss Casey is missing. According to Coble, she's in the break room for failing to supervise Helly. Coble chastises Mark for looking around other departments. Mid-argument, Mark asks what his job actually is. "We serve Keir, you child," Coble barks and adds that hallway privileges for MDR are revoked. Dylan and Helly talk about the Miss Casey situation, and Dylan asks if Helly and Mark are an item. Apparently, he thinks baby goats is a euphemism for sex. Just then, Mark comes back and frustratedly informs them of Coble's new rule. Irving humbly apologizes, which causes Mark to reconsider. Cut to all 4 MDR refiners walking to O&D. Coble sees them on the security cameras and sends Milchick to deal with them. The MDR crew are brought to O&D's secret backroom, where dozens of workers are fabricating seemingly random objects. "This is more people than I've ever seen," Helly remarks. The two groups quickly realize that neither knows what the true purpose of their jobs is. Mark rallies the O&D workers to band together and figure out what's really going on. As this is happening, Dylan stumbles upon some illustrated cards that seem to depict martial arts moves. He discreetly pockets one. Just then, Milchick enters to take MDR back where they belong. He brings them to Koble, who sings an eerie hymn-like song about Keir Egan before chewing out Mark for abusing her trust. Grainer takes Mark to the break room. While walking through the hallway to the break room, Mark passes Miss Casey going in the opposite direction. "I'm sorry," he whispers. Mark and Alexa are on another date. Alexa notices Mark's knuckles are bright red, which Mark brushes off as a workplace injury. He's been told he got them from moving a water cooler. At Devon and Rickon's, Devon is searching for information on Angelo Arteto. Apparently, he's a senator with a pro-Severance platform and ties to Lumon. Devon is interrupted when Rickon announces he's brought in a lactation consultant for an interview. Surprise, it's Miss Selvig. Selvig quickly proves her skills when she soothes the baby by humming the same Keir hymn. Somewhere else, a child sits in front of a TV with his eyes closed, counting to 1,000. Dylan is in a closet, somehow in any form while outside of Lumon. Milchick tells him that a card is missing from O&D, and he needs to know where it is. Dylan is barely listening, overwhelmed by this glimpse into his Audi's life. Dylan eventually admits that he stashed the card in the restroom, and he has no clue what it is. Milchick thanks him. Just then, the boy, Dylan's son, bursts in and hugs him. Dylan is shocked. Milchick quickly makes a call and Dylan is back in Audi mode. Mark and Alexa attend a punk concert on a whim and the band turns out to be headlined by Petey's daughter, June. They briefly make awkward conversation after the show is over. Mark and Alexa kiss. Grainer knocks on Koble's door. Someone has been secretly using a research building on the old college campus, he says, and he thinks it's Regabi. Mark lies awake thinking of Petey's last moments. Alexa sleeps next to him. Mark retrieves Petey's phone and it rings almost immediately. It's Regabi. Mark says he wants to understand what's going on and she asks if they can meet. Mark meets her under the research facility. Mark asks her who she is. Before she can answer, she hears a strange sound and asks Mark to come with her. Mark follows Regabi into her underground lab where she reveals she's the one who reintegrated Petey. As she critiques Mark's decision to sever, Grainer suddenly enters, having followed them. He begins to tell Mark that they're co-workers on the severed floor, but Regabi sneaks up and kills Grainer with an aluminum bat. She then gives Grainer's management ID to Mark, instructing him to take it to work, assuring him that his innie will know what to do. She also takes Petey's phone and advises Mark to dispose of his clothes. Mark, shocked, leaves the lab. When Mark gets home, he strips down and puts his clothes in a garbage bag, only for Alexa to walk in on him standing in the kitchen in just his underwear. When Alexa asks where he was, Mark lies, saying he needed to clear his head. Alexa then leaves. At Lumon, Milchick tests the new doors and retrieves the card Dylan stole, handing it to Bert G. He tells Bert they can now focus on the final preparations, and mentions he has a surprise for him. Milchick then speaks with Dylan about the previous night's incident, revealing it's a procedure called the overtime contingency. Milchick dodges questions about Dylan's son and asks him to keep the incident a secret, offering perks as a consolation. Mark S. clocks in and is immediately greeted by Milchick, who escorts him to his desk, citing a new protocol. Mark notices new steel doors around the MDR room, and when he enters, the team is on edge. Meanwhile, at Devon's house, Selvig is instructing Devon on breastfeeding. They share coffee and laugh together, with Devon recounting a story about a rich woman at a birthing camp and her theory that the woman was severed to give birth. Selvig probes Devon for information about Mark's wife, asking if Mark ever thinks he sees her. Devon's response isn't shown. Back at Lumon, Irving tries to persuade Mark to visit O&D again. Dylan, preoccupied with thoughts of his son, is more surly than usual. Milchick bursts in with a boombox, announcing a 5-minute music dance experience as a reward for Helly's excellent performance. Helly chooses maracas and defiant jazz as her genre. The team begins dancing, but Dylan, silently fuming, eventually snaps and attacks Milchick, canceling the dance experience. Milchick leaves to report Dylan to Miss Koble. After Milchick leaves, Dylan explains the overtime contingency to the team. Helly suggests hijacking it to escape Lumon, and Mark realizes he can use Grainer's ID for this purpose. Dylan offers to keep watch while the rest leave, but Irving heads off to see Bert instead. Helly and Mark enter the security room together. As Helly searches for information on the OTC, Mark sees that Koble is arriving, and they rush back to MDR with Helly taking the OTC instruction page with her. When Koble arrives, she's pulled aside by Natalie. Grainer is dead, and the board wants answers. Koble speculates that the killer might be the person who cracked reintegration, and the board requests further discussion at the upcoming Egan Gala. Meanwhile, Irving stumbles upon a melon party at O&D only to realize it's a retirement party for Bert. Devastated, Irving watches as the Bert he knows effectively ceases to exist. He causes a scene and curses out Milchick. Back at MDR, the team plans to enable the OTC, realizing someone must stay behind to do it. Dylan unexpectedly volunteers, despite it requiring him to hold 2 lever switches for an extended time. When Irving returns to MDR, he declares, "Let's burn this place to the ground." Outie Mark, now at home, pours himself another drink and hears a knock at the door. It's Alexa, who's come back to retrieve her phone. Mark tries to convince her he's ready for a relationship by tearing up a picture of his wife, but Alexa silently leaves. Realizing his mistake, Mark tapes the picture back together, revealing it to be Miss Casey. We open on Outie, Irving, who is outside reading before heading into his home. Inside, he begins painting with black paint, listening to rock music and drinking coffee. As he covers his entire canvas with paint, he seems lost in his work, completely immersed in the process. At Lumon, the team is hard at work. Helly is still refining her tasks, working feverishly despite Mark's concerns. The rest of the team has already finished their work for the week, leaving Helly as the last one to hit her quota. Milchick and Coble watch the security feeds, their worry evident. Coble decides it's time for another wellness session for Mark, but Milchick expresses some hesitation. Helly finally meets her quota, and an animated message from Keir Egan appears, expressing his pride. Irving turns to Mark and asks, "So it's on now?" Cut to Mark and Coble, laughing in her office about narrowly avoiding a quota crisis. Coble asks who should get the waffle party, and Mark suggests Dylan. Coble instructs Mark to visit the wellness center. There, Mark notices how sparsely decorated the room is, and Casey informs him that she will be retiring. Mark offers to talk to someone to prevent her from leaving. Casey expresses her gratitude, noting that her time with MDR has been the most valuable of her brief career as an innie. "Why do you care what happens to me?" she asks. Mark responds, "Because we're people, not parts of people. No one gets to just turn you off." Coble, watching from the security feed, abruptly cuts it. Milchick praises the fact that Mark and Casey don't remember each other as it indicates the chips are working. Coble remains unconvinced and instructs Milchick to take Casey to the testing floor. Casey is then escorted down a dark hallway with an elevator leading to an even deeper level of Lumon. Milchick arrives at MDR with an egg bar and an undisclosed gift for Dylan. The team has a Lumon-approved egg party, and Helly offers to stay instead of Dylan. Dylan is fine with staying behind as this is just the first step. Irving, reading from the Lumon handbook, scoffs at the situation. Back in Coble's office, Natalie confronts her with photos of Helly's attempted suicide and questions why the board wasn't informed. Natalie implies that Coble's second life as Miss Selvig is unauthorized and fires her. In MDR, Helly and Mark discuss their plans when Milchick bursts in, announcing that the party is over due to a management issue. The real reason for his departure is escorting Coble out of the building through the stairwell exit. The MDR team revisits their plan. Dylan will stay behind for his waffle party, slip out, and activate the OTC while Mark, Helly, and Irving are outside Lumon. Mark quotes from the UUR book and they head to the elevator. Before they leave, Helly pulls Mark into a passionate kiss, saying, "In case we don't come back, or, I don't know, in case we do?" We finally see what a waffle party entails. Dylan is served a large plate of waffles and milk. He then puts on a creepy Keir Egan mask, and 4 scantily clad dancers dressed as the 4 Tempers perform. Dylan seizes his chance and manages to escape while the dancers are occupied. Coble has a full-blown meltdown while driving home, ranting to herself about Natalie. Upon arriving home, she destroys her Keir shrine in a fit of rage. A knock at the door reveals Mark, who invites her to Devon and Rickon's party. Coble reluctantly agrees. At the party, Mark confides in Coble that he's considering quitting Lumon. Coble, tearful, tells him to stay away from the party and protect himself. Outie? Irving returns home to his dog and begins painting again. It's revealed that he is painting the elevator to the testing floor, a significant detail that hints at the larger mystery. Dylan finally reaches the control room and places his gift, a holographic glass cube of the MDR team, on a table. He struggles, but manages to reach both switches simultaneously. This action triggers a wake-up for the innies, setting the stage for the unfolding events. Irving, Helly, and Mark each wake up in their outie bodies, reeling from the shocking revelations of their severance. Mark finds himself in mid-conversation with Miss Coble, who is now living as Selvig. But his initial shock about seeing his former boss quickly turns to surprise as he learns he has a sister. Irving is at home working on one of his signature all-black paintings, which seem to dominate his space. Helly, on the other hand, is at a posh dinner party and is informed she needs to give a speech in just 20 minutes. Her new friend introduces her to Gabby Arteta, the senator's wife that Devon encountered while pregnant. When Gabby introduces Helly as Helena Egan, Helly is taken aback. Meanwhile, Dylan is in a desperate battle, trying to hold both switches in the control room. Mark, overwhelmed by the situation, ducks into an empty room to collect his thoughts, only to be interrupted by Devon and her baby, the first infant he has ever seen. He almost gets a chance to explain things to Devon, but is soon sidetracked by Rickon's book reading event. Mark has to share his copy with a fellow enthusiast named Rebecca, since he left his own at the office. Devon promises to discuss things later. Irving explores his home, revealing a dog named Radar and a room filled with war medals. He finds a trunk packed with military memorabilia, including a Navy uniform and an old photo of a young man labeled Dad. When he opens a hidden panel in the trunk, he discovers a collection of Severance-related newspaper clippings and stolen Lumon documents. Among these documents, he finds Bert's address. At Rickon's party, Mark is struck by the realization that Rickon, the author of a book that profoundly impacted him, is also his brother-in-law. Before Mark can process this, Coble arrives and asks to read from Rebecca's book as well. At the Lumon event, Helly starts to piece together the truth about her identity. She is a Lumon heiress, and her severance was a staged test to validate the process. As Helly is preparing for her speech, she ducks into the bathroom and encounters an old man, who turns out to be her father. He cryptically informs her that she will one day sit with him at his revolving, and that Lumon plans to give everyone a severance chip. Before Helly can fully absorb this, she must head to the stage to deliver her speech. She looks at herself in the mirror and recites the lines she was forced to memorize. Irving hurriedly gets dressed and rushes outside, struggling with his car before finally getting it started. He passes Coble speeding in the opposite direction. Coble manages to contact Milchick and informs him about Mark breaking containment. Milchick heads to the security office to switch everyone back, but he encounters a barricaded security door and pleads with Dylan to let go of the switches. At the dinner party, Mark finishes explaining his situation to Devon, who then tells him about his late wife. Mark questions Devon about Coble's presence at the party, to which Devon responds with confusion. She thinks he's referring to Mrs. Selvig. The two realize that Coble already knows about the OTC protocol being activated, and Devon recalls last seeing Coble with the baby. Milchick, using a pocket knife, starts cutting through the belt Dylan used to barricade himself. He tries to convince Dylan to open the door by offering various perks, but Dylan is only interested in remembering the birth of his son. Milchick offers to give Dylan information about his other children if he opens the door. Devon alerts Rickon to the situation, and Rickon decides to search the house to see if Coble might still be there. Irving locates Bert's house and sees him celebrating his retirement with what appears to be his husband. Meanwhile, the baby Eleanor is found safe and sound, with a random partygoer claiming credit for her discovery. As Helly prepares for her speech, she is abruptly confronted by Coble, who hisses, "Is it you?" Helly coldly responds that she plans to destroy Lumon. Coble warns her that it's her friends who will suffer if she proceeds, not Lumon. Helly takes the stage and begins her speech, revealing that she is an innie and exposing the public deception about Severance. Mark discovers a photo of his wife, realizing she is Miss Casey. Irving arrives at Bert's house and pounds on the door. Milchick finally saws through the belt, and as Mark screams, "Devon, she's alive!" Milchick tackles Dylan, ending the OTC protocol and switching everyone back to their innie states. Thanks for watching. We hope you liked how the season ends. Please leave your comments on what you feel about the season and your hopes for Season 2. Keep watching. Cheers.